Awesome, and welcome to How to Make It in Toronto here. This is Carl Shams, and today I'm getting the great chance to interview Mr. Ryan Rigterink. And I'll give you a quick introduction on Ryan before we get going. So Ryan is a chief instigator and business coach dedicated to reinventing leadership to serve everyone at a higher level and build workplaces where people actually want to work. Over the last 2 decades, he has worked with hundreds of businesses learning the nuances of how employer-employee relationships impact performance. Ryan helps leaders elevate their game to build amazing cultures and high-performing teams. His area of expertise is workplace transformation, focusing on how leaders can radically improve their recruiting, leadership, and employee retention by shifting how they approach the people they recruit, hire, and lead. Hey, Ryan, how's it going?
Great, thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Not a problem. I'm really excited about this conversation. I feel like we can learn a lot about business transformation, really getting to understand the leadership and employee relationship as well from you. And you've had a lot of experience, obviously, working with people in general. So I'd love to ask, or our first question would be, how do you define success?
Oh boy, so that's a big question, right? I think success for me has changed over the course of time. And I think early on it was about career advancement and a lot of things. I would say right now success is defined at how can I impact the world and create workplaces, environments, and actually even redefine work itself so it serves people at a higher level. So I define success now as more aspirational, like how big of a dent can I make on the universe on this? So
that's awesome. I love that. I love that answer. So to give people a bit of a background, I'd love for you to share, what's your background in business and leadership for people to get a better understanding and scope of what it is that you're doing in leadership ops.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got kind of an unusual career path. I've worked across 4 different industries, the bulk of which was in healthcare. I've worked in a variety of different roles. So I've worked in sales training, biz dev and marketing. I've worked in management, operations, leadership, and I've also done a fair amount of leadership in the innovation space. So how do we create strategic win-win-win, whether that's partnerships, arrangements, business model innovation. And so it's a little bit of an unusual career path, but it's given me a vantage point of working across hundreds of different businesses over the years, and to really borrow and see what are the patterns that, every industry is different, but there are patterns that show up that are somewhat universal. So it's given me a little bit different of a leadership lens to see interact with not only different industries, but across so many different organizations. So
yeah, that's awesome. I mean, I have an experience certainly working in sales and working across different industries, whether that's in tech or marketing tech. So I would say, what do you think are some of the commonalities that you'd say when it comes to people that you find in the different industries that you've worked?
I see actually, it's going to maybe be a little bit counterintuitive, but I see, maybe not. I see a lot of frustration actually. I see a lot of people who, so the balance of power of leadership and like employees has been such that that's sort of been both in recruiting and hiring and even in the hierarchical aspect of work has been the weight of the power distribution there has been more one-sided. And so I see a lot of people who are frustrated with not only what's being offered, but it seems much more transactional what people are experiencing than what people desire, which is how do we partner on a level that we can both thrive beyond the paycheck and really do good in the process. I see that. I do think so. Putting my analytical hat on here for a second, I do think we're living in a really fantastic time in history where industries are being shaken up, leadership itself is being retooled. And so I think there's some legacy mindsets and paradigms that people are like, their time of being around is probably expired, and people are looking for what's new and better and improved and actually dignifies them, and they can genuinely show up and thrive and everybody win at a higher level. And so I sense like that there's things that are kind of breaking forth right now. And it's like the early signs where certain things are showing up as no longer acceptable, as like the dysfunction is coming forward, like the systems that are supposed to serve people, like there's exposure of things that maybe a twisting of incentive, or like controls that actually serve the industry and not the customer. Like, so there's these things that are showing up in the form of problems that are actually invitations for what is better and what can replace. And so that's what I see actually people complaining about, but I'm very excited about it because I see the collective aspect of all of that as like growing pains and a call for what is next and better and what we can create in the future, which is now. So
yeah. That's awesome. I mean, why are you so passionate about changing how work gets done? How did you get into that? Yeah.
Oh, I'm passionate. I'm passionate actually from a few different sources. I have encountered toxic work environments. I've encountered great work environments. I've encountered fantastic leaders, and I've created and I've experienced some less than great leaders. And while I've experienced that, I've literally gone through, like, I felt the toxicity leaving my body over the matter of a couple months after getting out of one culture and environment that I did not understand until I felt my body physically going through the release of that stress and that toxicity. Like I became aware of how it affected me at a level that I wasn't even aware of when I was like the fish in the fishbowl kind of thing. I wasn't aware that there was a world beyond that and how what was in the water was affecting me. So that's one layer that was like assessing, okay, wow, this is actually a bigger deal than what it is, because it didn't just affect my work, it affected me. It affected my relationships. It affected my life, my family. It affected a lot of different things beyond that. So that was like one thing. But why I am as passionate as I am today is because I've got, it's simple. I've got 4 kids who are entering the workforce, and I have seen them and other people that I've coached deal with the same things. And so there's are you a parent by chance or no?
No, not just yet.
Okay, so there's an aspect of being a father or a mother that we will do things for our kids that we won't even do for ourselves, because there's just a whole nother layer of passion, protection, like just love, right? And so I look at this generation that's coming up, and I'm excited for what they are willing to do, and even what they're unwilling to put up with, because it's something that I think is needed to change for a long time. And it just, I'm passionate about it because there are alternatives and there are ways to approach this stuff that are actually win-wins, create more value for everybody. And I want everybody to thrive, right? I want my kids to thrive. I want that whole generation to thrive. And some of the things that we hold on to because we've always done it that way, or that's what we were taught decades ago, like, come on, it's a new day, right? So let's change our mind, change our approaches, and actually treat people in a way that dignifies them, as well as that the work and the work productivity they do for the company. And so I just think I just look at it as like, what society do we want to leave to the next generation, right? What type of work environments do we want our kids to encounter And do we want them to be treated in a very transactional, one-sided way, or do we want them to thrive and create massive more value, both for the organization they're in, as well as the future of who they want to become? And that to me is exciting. Like when we stop talking about like tasks and transactions and we start talking about people and who they want to become, that's to me where like, let's go, right? I'm 1,000% in on that conversation with anybody.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask, so what kind of lessons are you learning from what you're taking when you're working with companies and leaders? Because I feel, and definitely based on what you've said, is people obviously want more from work, whether it could be like more education or at least either more input in terms of where a company is going, or at least, to feel like they're more connected to the company itself. So what are some things you're learning from what people are saying and what they want to see as changes?
Well, I think the pains are experienced very differently depending on which side of this you're on, right? The pains on the frustration on the leader side are, I just want people to be motivated. I want them to own what they want to do. And I don't want to hire only to hear a whole bunch of expectations of what people want. And then people churn out for $2 more an hour or something like that, right? So there's a set of frustrations that are real. But what the challenge is there's this legacy mindsets around leadership that put all of the onus of responsibility on the individual instead of a joint responsibility of the fact that actually the work and the motivation and the work productivity actually happens in the tension in the relationship between the employer and the employee. And so it's two things I'd say. It's getting responsibility to be elevated on both sides of that equation, solving the underlying things that are needed for that to happen. But then secondly, it's getting people to actually see that there's more possible than what has always been. One of the things that I probably hear the most is, well, that's just the way we do it. That's just the way it is in our industry. There's this sort of mindset of inertia or mindset of status quo that thinks that that's actually all that there is. And so it's what that does is it pivots people's attention back to just doing more of what they've always done, expecting to get better results. And that actually just increases frustration for everybody. So
yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. And so what's the biggest hurdle that you faced in going through a workplace transformation, you think?
It depends on where they're at in their journey. So every company is different. Every leader is different. So I'd say it's very, very situational. But I'd say one of the challenges is how accountability typically works in organizations. It's typically top down in terms of how accountability happens, and flipping that so that both accountability and conversations have a two-way, a genuine two-directional, so voice of the employee, getting leaders to think about not just getting people to do stuff, but how do we empower people to do more? And so some of those are like letting go of the old levers of command and control that people, we all sort of under stress naturally revert to, and building the muscles of how do we empower and inspire. Like it takes actually, I think, more faith, and it's more of a longer cultivation relational process, but a much higher ceiling of potential and results. But it's getting out of that short-term fear, control, the quick results mentality into how do we cultivate much better long-term results.
Yeah. Awesome. And what are some resources that you're using or that help you as you're going through this process?
So developed some curriculum and material for that, 4 key paradigm shifts that help leaders sort of shift from sort of the legacy leadership mindset to the potential aspirational mindsets. And then it's really applying those principles into every point of the employee life cycle. So how do we really elevate what value potential is possible in the employee experience, and being intentional about how to do that? So breaking down the entire employee life cycle and understanding at each point, how do we massively create more value in that? And that varies. Every organization's at a different point of what they have in place, what can be improved upon, and so the application of that's very, very customized, but the principles are pretty universal. So
that's awesome. So is that a part of what you're doing with leader ops?
yeah. With Leaders Ops, I've got a coaching program. It's an 8-week intensive where we break down these leadership principles of really how do we build the muscles to do the long-term investment of leading people in a way that creates better results. And it's to what it really is some of it is what's called psychological re-anchoring. So in leading people in this new trust, inspire, and really cultivate the right things in that relationship, it actually requires us as leaders to show up and view our role differently and how we're creating value for the organization. So it's no longer just pushing for performance, but it's cultivating the environment and really the touch points and the rhythms that cultivate and proactively produce the kind of results that we want to get. And so it's the whole ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure kind of thing. But how do we practically do that? Instead of just sound bites, how do we walk that out? So
that's really cool. I mean, it sounds like you're really working with leaders to get the best out of them and out of their people as well. So let's discuss how to build an amazing workplace culture. Like, how do you go about doing that?
So I think 2 of the 4 paradigm shifts really speak to that. I would say, one of them is, and again, these sound great, but the application is where the rubber meets the road, right? So one of the twists in terms of creating a growth culture is instead of using people to do work, use work to develop and grow people. And so that's more than a soundbite. That actually is a leadership philosophy of how do we distribute work amongst our team? Like, instead of just choosing the best person to do everything, how do we distribute work in a way that actually creates growth opportunities, which might actually be assigning a project or a piece of work to somebody that's a growth opportunity. And it might not be the fastest way to get that done, but in the long term, how do we actually use the work to grow capacity, leadership, skills? And so in the long run, by distributing work differently and looking through a lens of how do we leverage the tasks to accelerate people, ultimately builds that capacity in that team, and ultimately it puts work in a paradigm and a lens for each person to look at it as, I'm not just being asked to do something for the sake of doing something. Like, it also is like the frame of the conversation, right? It's listen, I'm giving this to you, and let me connect the dots. Here's what we've already talked about in terms of your career growth and what's of interest to you. Here's why I'm giving it to you. So it's adding the why and the who in an intentional way instead of just distributing the what.
Yeah. And I feel like certainly that's what people are looking for, the why behind what they're doing, right? Because it's a little bit more meaningful in terms of what they're looking to do. So let me ask you, what do you think the younger generations are doing better than in your own generation?
So they're not waiting for retirement to live. I think is a big one, right? The whole, I think, false promise that my generation sort of bought into was, you work, save, and there's value to that. But there's also sort of nested within that an idea that we're postponing perpetually for this end thing when I will start enjoying life. And that's not only is that not true, it's kind of a shame, right? It's a waste of enjoying the process. And so that's one of the big things I really appreciate about your generation and my kids' generation is they are on they're not looking to work to live, or they're working to live, not living to work.
Yeah.
And I love that because I mean, why not? Like I think as somebody, I grew up on a farm, so I love to work. I grew up with really strong work ethic, and it was a family business, so there was an intertwining of life and work in that context. But it's a generational difference that I don't think the younger generation is lazy. I just think they want what's meaningful and authentic. And some of the structures and strategies of the past don't actually measure up to that. And so they are making decisions for what is meaningful to them. And I think that's a step in the right direction. So
yeah, that's awesome. And so what would you say do you think needs to be added to the leadership conversation?
That work is not just about the vision of the organization, right? We have an entire hiring and management complex that's built on the idea it's the individual serving the vision of the organization. But what is way more powerful is when you think about our eyes, right? Our eyes are literally two different sources of vision. And what does our brain do in our visual cortex? It actually brings two points of vision together. And that's where in our brain and our neurology, we sense motion and color. And if you think about that, it's kind of a powerful parallel to, do you want a black and white, motionless environment that is your experience of work, or do you want something that is full of motion and life and color from an experience standpoint? Well, that happens when we bring two visions together. And so I think part of the conversation that needs to happen is an elevation of what's the vision of the individual, and how can the vision of the organization and the individual come together in a much more powerful way versus just hiring somebody to serve a corporate vision. I think there's some like, obviously there's value in that, but I think there's a lot more powerful levers that we can tap into as leaders. And this is also tied to the frustration that a lot of senior leaders have, where they're able to get buy-in at the top, but the engagement wanes the further on down the organization. And it's part of it is attributed to this, that those at the top have the proximity and the autonomy for the corporate vision. And so proximity to vision matters. And when you try and drive that down throughout an organization, you will get that in measure. But what's way more powerful is tying the individual vision to the corporate vision. That's where proximity goes back to the person.
That's sure. So do you think, I guess the workers, need more, like more either conversation or more closeness to leadership for this change to really start to come around?
What do you mean by closeness? You mean like yeah,
maybe transparency between like the vision. Is that what you think?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit of a two-sided problem, right? We've got people who may or may not know what they want to do, right? So we're building some tools for this, right? Career pathing, sense making, building transferable skills, having the ability to change and shift in terms of career desires, and explore. And so we're adding data for the individual to have some intentionality and some autonomy in their own career path, like being the captain of their own career and having some insights for themselves personally. So that's part of the missing piece. That's often an unfair question. We ask you, the younger generation, what do you want to be when you grow up? And we don't actually help them, give them a process and help facilitate that in very good ways. And so we're trying to add the insights to that actually creates sort of the surface area to have more of the valuable conversations between the employer, the leader, and the individual. And so that you've got to have the data points and the context there to have a more meaningful conversation. And so, yeah, I think both are needed.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. Maybe this is a little bit off, but I was just going off what you said. Do you think when a kid does ask, "Oh, I want to be this when I grow up," it is important to kind of show them or provide them with a kind of path of what it would take to get there? Do you think that would help them in terms of getting that goal or maybe switching their career path?
I think it's massively valuable. It's the reason we built Workgaze. Workgaze has personalized career paths that show you. You put in your end goal dream career, and it will show you what are the transferable knowledge, skills, and abilities to help navigate for that. So you can actually search for work to build your career towards what your end goal career is. And so it's very practical, hands-on, but it's also dynamic. You can change it at any point. You can change it 5 times a day if you want. It will automatically reset because without a path and a next step, like we feel like, we're a minnow in a very big ocean otherwise. And so, yeah, having practical next steps for the individual, but then that also is a way to partner as a leader, to partner with the individual without having to have a PhD and career paths and all this sort of stuff. So we can show up with a minimal amount of insights, but have it be effective. I think is part of what helps serve both the individual and the organization. Yeah. So I think it's massively important. I've invested heavily into that. So
yeah, that's awesome. And so what paradigm shifts do you think help create a great culture to grow?
So one is the one I already mentioned, which is instead of using people to do work, how do we actually leverage work to grow and develop people? The other one I would say is back to the integration of 2 visions. That becomes powerful. So for instance, I had a conversation with somebody probably a year or 2 ago, and it was an early career kind of dialogue. And the conversation was, well, what do you want to do? And she's like, well, I know I need to get a job right now, but I just don't want to work in fast food. I'm like, well, okay, that's interesting. So 3 to 5 years from now, if you could be doing like your dream job, like what do you think that would be? And her response was, well, I'd really love to be a speech pathologist and possibly be a partner in a practice. And she's like, but I don't know. And I'm like, well, that's amazing. Like, so in order to do that, you need to learn how to operate with different systems, to be able to document things, to be able to interact with an individual and ask good questions, to understand how different stakeholders have different perspectives, and navigate the family dynamics. You need to be able to understand like the P&L of the finances and cash flow and all these things. Like, to really do that well, there's a lot of skills around that are needed. So like, I'm like, I know you don't want to do fast food. I said, but just for the sake of conversation, let's say I was a fast food manager. I owned a fast food place. And I told you I was willing to take 3 to 5 minutes every week, and we would work on all of those transferable skills for you to be a practitioner and a speech pathologist. Would that be of interest to you? And she immediately went from, I'm not interested in fast food to, well, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
exactly. And so it's this whole dynamic of, it's not the work. It's like, it's not about just the work. And so we get so hyper-focused on what's the definition of the work itself, but we miss the entire context of meaning and motivation of how it serves the individual. And so instead of just, I don't want to do that, which is the frustration, it's how do we get people to show up in a way that is meaningful to them and it serves their future. So it's not about the work. It's how it serves the individual in their future that really changes how they think about it and how they show up. And every leader I know wants to have people who have a self-employed mindset and are invested in the work. And this is how to do that very practically. But it's actually taking a step back and not just thinking about the work. It's about thinking about the interaction between the work and the individual and how to create a relationship that matters to the individual.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's awesome. I feel like you kind of just answered this next question with everything you just said, but how are you helping business leaders retain great talent?
So it's identifying the talent. So so to take a step back to what I was just talking about, how do we understand the work that we offer, not in just the context of tasks and qualifications, but how do we understand the roles that we offer, the positions that we're hiring for, and the journey that can be accomplished through that? And so what we're doing is we're helping leaders understand and recruit for most valuable journey of employee experience, of career growth. And so looking at it through a different lens and then recruiting for that and hiring for that changes everything. It actually creates the foundation of what I'm talking about. Instead of just saying, okay, if you come here and if you do A, B, and C, 6 to 12 months from now, we will, this whole carrot thing, right? We will talk about where you want your career to go. Like, no, forget that. Like, let's talk about the journey and the value that can be created in the role before we even recruit for it. And then recruit specifically for where we can create the most value for the individual. By taking that approach, we get people who show up and are vested in what we want to accomplish. And so it's the golden rule in practice between an employer and an employee, and thinking about work itself differently. It's not about the task. It's not about the work. It's about the value that's created through the work, both for the customer and the employee. And so if we do that, it's a completely different mindset around hiring. But if we pull that forward and we don't just hang that carrot out, so it's like, if then, right? If you do this, we'll do that. It's like, no, we're here to actually help you accomplish your goals, and you're here to help the company accomplish our goals. And if both parties show up with that mindset, the value exchange completely uncapped.
Yeah, that's awesome. So tell us, how can people find you? Where can people connect with Leader Ops or find you, sir?
Yeah, so you can go to leadersops.com. You can reach me through that website if you're interested in searching for jobs that create more valuable for you and your career, or if you're on the hiring side and you want to hire people and apply this methodology with data, so not just intuition, but actually having the science and the data and the insights do it, you can go to workgaze.com, where we're launching with both the job seekers as well as the employers. So,
okay,
would love to
Oh, sorry. Say that again.
No, I was just saying I would love to connect with anybody who's interested in really moving from frustration to a future-oriented mindset around people and work. So
awesome. That's great. And for you, just to get back to you, you seem like you're really impacting, either workplaces and people looking for work or looking to improve their career. Do you have, or have you had an impactful mentor that's helped you along your path?
I've had a lot of them, but probably the most impactful one was my father. I literally grew up working on a farm. I started working out when I was, I think, 3, literally. So we were involved really early on. But so I learned so much from him, but he instilled that work isn't just about work itself. It's about enjoying what you do. And it's, we grew up with a saying, and you've probably heard of it, right? Find what you love to do and you never work a day in your life. Yeah. So that has been a mantra that I've tried to instill in my own kids. Many of them have found the things that they love to do. And so I've gotten a little pushback on that. Like, Dad, it's still work. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. Work still takes effort, right? It's still work, but it's entirely different when you are working, doing something that you love and you're good at and you can thrive in versus that is the opposite of that. And so that's my mentor. He's since passed, and so I miss him dearly. He was not just a dad, but a friend, a business mentor, a coach to me. But yeah, he was one of a kind. So.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. And finally, what are you most proud of with everything that you've done so far?
Wow, what most proud of? There's a lot of like my family would be at the top of the list, right? But career-wise, in terms of work, which is kind of the context we're talking about here, I would say it's probably not giving up on this impact. It's when anyone's trying to change the paradigm around somebody or around something, it's met with some resistance. It's met with, it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So I would say pushing on this rock long enough to see it start to roll and now start to see the impact happen. I'm most proud of that because not as a feather in my cap, but most proud of it because I'm probably the most passionate and excited and looking forward to this gaining momentum. So that's the reason for it. So
that's awesome because it is a massive, massive, paradigm to try and shift forward and make a change across workplace and interaction between leadership as well. So that is awesome. I just want to thank you so much for your time today, Ryan. It's been great to connect with you, and hopefully we can jump on for more conversations in the future as well. But thank you so much.
Thank you for having me on. I really enjoyed our conversation and appreciate what you're doing for Toronto. Keep it up.
Thank you. Thank you. Take care, Ryan.
Take care.
And